And thank you for appeasing me and letting me ask some questions. Now, I'd like to open the questions to the floor, and instantly hands raised. I'll just remind everyone that it's question and answers. Use your opportunity to ask these guys questions. If you go on for too long, I'm gonna cut you off unless you come to a question. Okay, so it's not me being rude; it's the rules. If we can start here, we'll go across here, please. And then we'll come to here and we'll sort of zigzag through. Okay.
تحية طيبة للجميع. أقدم نفسي أنا جوزيف صلي وسبي عضو مجلس النواب العراقي. في الحقيقة أنا لدي 3 أسئلة باختصار. الأول للسيد سام، والثاني الأول هو للسيد سام، والثاني هو للسيد ماكس، والثالث هو للسيد غالب. السؤال الأول، هنالك امتعاث كبير والشارع يتحدث عن عدم إمكانية داعش السيطرة على هذه المساحات الشاسعة، ولا تمتلك حقيقة أسلحة كثيرة وجبارة وجيوش منظمة. يعني نعلم أن التجربة علمتنا أن تم إسقاط أنظمة كانت غير مرغوبة بها من قبل أمريكا ومن قبل الولايات المتحدة وأعوانها، ولكن هذه المجاميع لماذا لا يتم القضاء عليها بسرعة بينما تحصد أرواحا كثيرة؟ يعني هنالك سؤال كبير أنه يعتقدون أن الولايات المتحدة وحلفائها إلى حد كبير غير جادون بالقضاء على داعش. فما هو ردكم على هذا السؤال؟ هذا أولا. السؤال الثاني، الداعش للأسف ترفع علم لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله وتقتل الناس باسم الدين. جميعنا نعلم أن الأديان السماوية بعيدة عن هذه التصرفات والعقل الإنسان لا يمكن أن يتخيلها، ولكن مع ذلك هنالك أماكن فيها خطاب متشدد وخطاب يحث على الإكراه. ألم يحين الأوان لوضع حد جدي لهكذا تصرفات وأن يطالبون عدم التدخل الدين بالسياسة؟ هذا السؤال الثاني. أما السؤال الأخير، تم التطرق إلى المناضل الأوجلان وإشادة بدوره، ولكن لا يزال هو قابعا بالسجن. إذا كنتم تعتقدون هو مناضل وله دور سياسي كبير، لماذا يقبع بالسجن لحد اليوم؟ شكرا جزيلا.
Okay, we'll take a couple more questions, and then we'll take 3 and then answer. So if we're here and then the man at the back that was originally supposed to get the microphone.
Okay, I'm George Haji. I wish for this session to be held in the presence of the decision and policymakers of Baghdad, because the distinguished speakers touched upon a very important thing. Mr. Anwar Muslim, he laid out the strategy how to fight, not to fight, how to uproot ISIS, and Mr. Hoffman also touched on that, which is through economic development and to reach out those areas who've been neglected, the oppressed people. And this is something that we've been saying this for a long time, but the decision makers in Baghdad unfortunately didn't listen to people. Now we have people who are in direct contact with ISIS, and they lay out this strategy, how to fight them. And this is very much related to our mission, which is dialogue. How to make dialogue and how to reach out to those people who've been oppressed, who've been neglected, whose areas were ignored, and this can be done through economic development. Although we know that this extremism, this fundamentalism has ideological background, but regardless of that, those oppressed areas, those people whom we couldn't reach them, they created a very fertile ground for this ISIS and the similar groups to grow and to create this problem.
Yeah. Does that formulate into a question at all?
How can we this session,
Yeah.
how can we make the outcome of this session, the strategy that's been laid out by our distinguished speakers, reach those decision makers and policy makers in Baghdad to listen to us and do what we want them to do.
Okay, thank you. And the man with the blue lanyard here, just straight back, he was supposed to be first. Yeah. This one, yeah, thank you.
Thanks. سردار عزيز. عندي سؤال للسيد أنور، هل يمكن ربط بناء علاقة طويلة الأمد بين القيادة والأمريكان؟ My question for Galip is that if PKK moving toward left in Turkey and PYD getting close to America, and how that affects their relationship. Can you hear me? If you explain that PKK moving toward left within Turkey and PYD as a de facto moving toward or getting closer to America, and I will ask Max later on regarding that question. If there's a closeness between PYD and American, how that affects the relationship between PKK and PYD in your view? And my question for Max is that can American take PYD as a partner, as a long-term partner, not as just an kind of apparatus or utilizing them for current event? Is that a long-term relationship between PYD and America is possible?
Okay, thank you. We'll take a couple of answers now. I'm very honoured to be asked a question, but I'm going to be very British about it, and the chair shouldn't really have an opinion. But so I will. The other direct question we will go to. So, what is? How can we reach out to policymakers on the things that we're discussing? I don't know if that's going to be direct questions to Max and Galip to answer there. Anwar, you're welcome to comment if you'd like. So Galip, the question that was received.
Well, I will start. Okay. Well, the first question was about how can Öcalan play a role if he is still being kept in jail. Well, Öcalan does play a role, and actually he plays a significant role, and actually he is like one of the two architects of whatever we have called so-called like peace process. But recently there is a debate in Turkey in order to create like some kind of secretariat for Öcalan and like providing Öcalan with wider access to public and providing public with wider access to Öcalan, such as like allowing the not just like MPs from HDP, but also like the journalists and etc. being able to visit Öcalan and talk Öcalan. That has not been put in practice, but I don't think that the government will be hostile to this idea, and like some government official has already offered favorable opinion. But right now, with this event over the Kobani has a bit delayed it, but I think this will be implemented, and I think it is necessary to be implemented because Öcalan is the most primary actor, and he should have like more wider access to public and etc. like to convey message directly. The second question was, the PKK is leaning towards more left, but the PYD is, working with US and etc. Well, first and foremost, the PYD has no other options. I mean, it's not a marriage of love, it's a marriage of convenience. And when it comes to the PKKs, I mean, in the end, PKK is a left-wing and socialist organization, but recent PKK's effort to fill the political vacuum that is already there on the left side of the political spectrum is not very much motivated by the ideological consideration, but to a great extent by pragmatic consideration. There is no any significant actor right now in Turkey that can fill the vacuum that is, the vacuum that are on the left of the political side. And the PKK saw, and the Kurdish movement in Turkey saw an opportunity in it. So it's not just reaching the left wing, but also like, disillusioned liberals as well, some of them who previously voted for the governing AK Party. So PKK is a left-wing organization, but the ideological consideration is not the main factor in its move towards leaning the left. therefore, like, you know, this will not disturb the relation between PKK and PYD.
Some direct questions aimed at Max as well.
Yes, I wanted to address the question of, you know, why can't the U.S. and its allies defeat ISIS more rapidly? I think we're just a few months in, so, you know, time will tell how effective this campaign will be. You know, there have been hundreds of airstrikes already, so that, you know, shows a very, you know, a serious campaign. It's not to be dismissed. As I said in my presentation, though, there are very strict political limits on the use of U.S. force. The military campaign will only work if it contributes towards a political settlement. That political settlement must include Sunni groups. If the United States drastically you know, strengthens the air campaign and starts hitting hundreds of targets all across Anbar province and killing Sunni civilians, that will undermine the very goal we're trying to achieve. So I don't think that would be wise, or I don't think that you'll see that happen. Second, you know, this again, the partners on the ground question. The U.S. has, you know, vast intelligence and surveillance assets, aerial surveillance, but they still can't be everywhere at once. And we can't just, the U.S. can't just take the word of a group on the ground to say, hit this place, you know, Daesh is there. They have to take that, and then they have to put a drone or a satellite above it to confirm that that in fact is true, to get a visual confirmation to the targets, and to, if they're in an area with civilians, to make sure then they're not with civilians when the airstrike comes. So it's a very painstaking process to avoid civilian casualties. And that, I think, is why you see this slow pace. And also because the partners on the ground are not yet ready to push in and take the areas that are cleared by airstrikes. There was also a question about the religious side, and of course I agree, as President Obama has said, you know, ISIS has nothing to do with Islam. It's an abomination. It has nothing to do with any religion. And you know, I know the President and others have encouraged religious leaders in the region to make that argument and to make it consistently and clearly and publicly, and that's very important. The question on Baghdad's role in economic development, I couldn't agree more. You know, as the coalition and Iraqi security forces and the Peshmerga start to clear areas of ISIS, what follows will be almost as important as the military. You know, immediately there have to be efforts to provide basic services, to provide some sort of economic development. And to the extent the U.S. can pressure Baghdad to make sure that happens, I'm sure that will happen. And the last, sorry, I'm going on, but the long-term relationship between the PYD and the United States, it remains to be seen. There's close military cooperation right now, and I think that will continue unless the PYD and the PKK do one of two things: either, you know, massacre civilians or start conducting atrocities. They'd lose U.S. support immediately, or reopen the armed conflict in Turkey, which would also be one of the few things they could do to lose U.S. support immediately. That's why I don't think you will see either of those things happen. So moving forward, the U.S. will be pressuring PYD, YPG to open up, to include other Kurdish groups, and also to try and reach out to the non-Kurdish opposition, the moderate Sunni opposition, such as they are, to establish cooperation and a broader front. Because all of those steps will just serve to improve the legitimacy of the opposition groups, and therefore widen the opportunity for the United States to help in more ways. So I think that's a great question, and we'll see, but I'm somewhat hopeful moving forward.
Thank you for your answers. We're going to take more questions. Because of time, we're going to take it 3 at a time, so remember to keep them brief. I'm going to shift over this way slightly. Oh, can we have 3 from here, please? And then I'll come to the sides. Don't worry, you'll be.
Good morning. My name is Dastan from University of Kurdistan Howler. My first question is for Mr. Hoffman. We saw, there is war in Syria, and we saw extreme groups emerging, but we saw no U.S. action, and also ISIS got close to Baghdad, but there was no action. But when they got close to Erbil, within 48 hours, we saw action. So what was the reason? What interests do you have in Erbil which makes you to react very fast? And for Mr. Anwar Muslim, your speech was kind of general. Can you please update us on what's going on in Kobani right now as we speak? Who's forwarding, who's backwarding? Thank you.
Thank you very much. A couple more questions. One more from here. We'll happen.
Thank you. Haval Mustafa, senior student at the American University of Iraq Suleimani. I have a question. There is a point that is ignored by international community, Iraqi government, and even the KRG, which is ISIS propaganda. So when ISIS shares a video or posts a video, like millions of people see it, like it, comment on it, and share it. So how can we stop ISIS propaganda? This is one question for Mr. Max. And my second question is, I will quote something from Mr. Prime Minister Nechivan Barzani in an interview. He said, international community admitted that Peshmerga is the only one who fights ISIS on the ground. But the thing is, we don't understand why don't they give us heavy weapons to fight ISIS. I will add something for it. What is the international community is afraid of in not giving heavy weapons to Peshmerga? Thank you.
And I see a female hand at the back. We haven't had a question from a lady, so can we please hear? And then we'll come over. The microphone, sorry.
بجبو مستر هوفمان از دخوازم پرسیاوی وکی بکم الباكوري رجلات سوريا قالك كتاب مسلح اسلامي هنا امريكا قريب هنا كجواهل بجيري وتشكا بدوا وك اوبوزيسيون نرم نها امزانين الويد جبهه النصر قالك يبيش فدچه وبرب حلب ددچه يعني هر دي سلاح جهه دست اسلاميه چه فرقات داعش وكتاب دي اسلامي هنا مادامي هر دخوازن حكمكي اسلامي لسوريا هبه جبو برز انور مسلم جي ام دزانن ارتش آزاد نب بريارا گل سوريا درباسي كوباني بو بريارا تركيا درباس بو حتى انها تركيا دبيجه داخياني خد دبيجه كو او د كوباني بكوباني ددليزن ومن چقاسي كارن باوريه بارتش آزاد ربكن قنه همهنگيد نابرا و ارتش آزاد دا صبح به ومن چقاسيش ارتش آزاد بشتراستم سپاس.
Okay, we'll maybe take some answers to the questions. There were some direct questions there, especially the first maybe to Mr. Anwar Muslim on an update of the Kobani situation, and then we'll just go through a reaction to the questions. Thank you.
طبعا الوضع في كوباني تحدثنا عنه. لم تسقط كوباني كما قيل، إنما كان هناك انسحاب من قرى خشية من ارتكاب المجازر، فتم سحب جميع المدنيين والمقاتلين إلى مركز المدينة، وبنفس الوقت تم استنزاف داعش وبسبب انتشاره على مساحة واسعة، فتم انسحاب إلى جميع القوات إلى داخل كوباني، وتموقع القوات الكردية على خطوط الدفاعية. وحتى الآن قلنا داعش لا يسيطر إلا على 30% من المدينة من الطرف الشرقي والطرف الجنوبي. أما بخصوص التعامل أو بين القوات الأمريكية واليابكة، فنحن جزء من المجتمع الدولي، والمجتمع الدولي عبر التحالف الدولي أخذ قراره بمحاربة داعش وإنهائه في معظم العالم. ونحن بشكل فعلي في مقاطعة كوباني وفي معظم المناطق الإدارة الذاتية كنا نحارب داعش أكثر من 8 أشهر. ففي كوباني لوحدها داعش منذ 8 أشهر يحاول الدخول إلى مركز وإلى المقاطعة ولم يستطيع، لهذا قام بقطع المياه الشرب التي تأتي إلى المقاطعة عن طريق نهر الفرات، قطع المياه الشرب عن المدينة، ومن بعدها قطع التيار الكهربائي التي تأتي من صد التشرين أيضا عن كوباني، وكذلك منع إدخال المواد الغذائية ومواد الطبية التي كانت تأتي من محافظة حلب بالإضافة إلى محافظة رقة، إضافة إلى اعتقال المدنيين على الهوية. كانوا يعتقلون المدنيين، وقد وصل عدد المختطفين من المدنيين الكرد إلى 600 شخص، بينهم 157 طفلا يتجاوز أعمارهم بين 13 إلى 15، كانوا عائدون من امتحاناتهم من محافظة حلب. معظم المناطق والقرى الكردية تعرضت للسلب والنهب بسبب الفتاوي اللي يدعونها إسلامية. تعرضت معظم القرى للتخريب لتدمير. هناك العشرات من المدنيين من النسوة والأطفال قطع رأسهم في بعض المناطق الكوباني مثل قرية الشلبية وقرية خربيصان وقرية قرموغ وقرية تلغزال وقرية بندر، وكان من بينهم أيضا بعض المعتوهين أي المجانين يعني. فداعش يستخدم هذه الأساليب بهدف ترويع وبهدف الدخول إلى المدينة من دون المقاومة، ولكن حقيقة القوات الكردية استطاعت وبمساندة طبعا التحالف الدولي، وهي الآن هناك تنسيق تام على الأرض وفي السماء، حيث يقوم طائرات التحالف بدك المعاقل الداعش، وبنفس الوقت الأبطال والمقاومين على الأرض يقومون بحملات التمشيط. ولكن لا يمكن الاستهانة بقوات داعش، فما زال الخطر قائم على المدنيين، فما زال هناك المدنيين داخل المدينة، فما زال هناك مدنيين على الحدود التركية. داعش لا زال يحاول الاقتحام، يزال يحاول الدخول إلى مركز المدينة عن طريق جهة شرقية وإغلاق البوابة الحدودية، المنفذ الوحيد للمدينة وهي منفذ البوابة مرشد بينار أو كما يقال كوباني. فدائما يحاول عبر إرسال السيارات الكبيرة المفخخة وإضافة إلى قذف المدينة بالعشرات من الهاون بشكل يومي، وبعدها يقوم بعمليات المهاجمة بعدد كبير من العناصر. ولكن فعلا وحدات حماية الشعب لا يمكن القول بالدقيقة أو دقيقتين عن مقاومتهم وصمودهم، بالإضافة إلى العناصر من الجيش الحر التي تحارب إلى جانب وحدات حماية الشعب منذ 8 أشهر من كتائب جبهة الأكراد وأسود السفيرة وشمس الشمال، بالإضافة إلى سوار رقة، وهم أيضا يصطفون أو يقاومون مع وحدات حماية الشعب ضد تنظيم داعش. وفي المحصلة هناك مشاركة من قبل القوات البيشمركة، وهناك دعم من قوات التحالف، وهناك دعم من قوى الكردستانية التي أرسلت الأسلحة إلى الوحدات حماية الشعب مشكورا بغية الصمود. حقيقة كانت مقاومة الكوباني رمز العالم، رمز اتفاق العالم على إنهاء داعش، وهذا رغم تناقضات سياسية بين القوى السياسية العالمية، ولكن هناك اتفاق على إنهاء هذا المرض الخبيث المسمى داعش، وذلك عبر التنسيق والتعاون بين جميع القوى الذي يهدفون باسم الإنسانية وباسم الديمقراطية وباسم التعايش السلمي بين جميع المكونات سواء في سوريا أو في الشرق الأوسط ككل.
Thank you very much. Very important words there. I don't know if either Galip or Max want to react to some of the questions that were posed quickly, or should. Okay, fine. Well,
the question on why there was no U.S. action before the sort of ISIS was advancing on Erbil, I think there are a number of reasons. First, the collapse of the Iraqi security forces in the north in Mosul was a shock to everyone, including the United States. It happened very quickly. I think the U.S. officials were reluctant to accept the weakness of the ISF in the north because the United States had poured, close to 7 years and billions of dollars into these forces, and so to see them wash away was very troubling for the United States, and I don't think they expected that. Second, I know that they had live footage from a surveillance drone of ISIS fighters on top of the Mosul Dam, and that was a real wake-up call for the United States because, as you all may know, the Mosul Dam, if it had been blown up or sabotaged in some way, could utterly destroy Mosul and even damage downriver cities as far as Baghdad. So I think that was a very clear signal to the United States that action had to be taken to stop this advance. There was also, there's a U.S. consulate in Erbil, and Erbil is, the Kurdish people are long-term friends of the United States, and the U.S. couldn't allow Erbil to fall and was worried about the momentum. But I think the most important thing probably determining the time frame of the U.S. response was President Obama and the U.S. were waiting for a more inclusive partner in Baghdad other than former Prime Minister Maliki, frankly. Maliki had lost legitimacy for a vast part of the country, and the U.S. could not intervene in a big way without some hope of a political accommodation, and that seemed impossible under Maliki. Otherwise, the U.S. would have become Maliki's air force, and the Kurds and the Sunnis and everyone who opposed Maliki would view the U.S. as illegitimate and react very poorly, and there would be no hope of a political settlement. So I think that was perhaps the most important thing dictating the timing of the U.S. involvement. The question about the moderate versus immoderate armed groups in northeastern Syria, I don't know the specific armed groups you're talking about in this case, but it's a great question. How do you determine which groups receive U.S. and international assistance and which groups don't within Syria? It's a very difficult question, particularly because the loyalties are so fluid for many fighters between the different groups. So someone may be a moderate in a moderate now and in al-Nusra tomorrow and in ISIS the next month. So it's very difficult. I'd say just as basic principles, though, the U.S. will, they have a vetting process, which I don't know all the details of, but they'll be looking for people who will respect civilians and minorities in the areas they control, who are open to a future Syria which includes all parties and which is democratic. The role of religion in life in future Syrian politics is, at this point, somewhat academic, but is open for debate by Syrians. That's something they will determine. But as long as it respects basic rights of the people, I think that can be accommodated, of course. But it's a great question, and it's something the U.S. is struggling with, and I don't think there's a great or a one answer for it. But good question.
Thank you. Everyone here is now going to probably hate me, but I'm going to, because of timings later on in the day, I'm going to have to bring this session to a close. Otherwise, everything's going to get kicked back in the panels later in the day. There'll be severe problems, and that's out of my hands, I'm afraid. I would like you all to thank the panel here. They've all come from far to be here. Grab them while they're having coffee. Ask your question then. But can we all have a round of applause, please? Thank you.